Hey folks, Cool18 here, and welcome to a video focusing on the mechanics of Pillars of Eternity. Pillars of Eternity is a game made basically by the same sort of people who made Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale and Planescape Torment. It very much tries to replicate the old Infinity engine and give you the same sense of gameplay. It is not set in the Dungeons & Dragons universe, it is in its own world. With its own set of mechanics. So this video is going to be really not going to have any gameplay whatsoever. On the plus side, it's really going to have very few spoilers at all. But we're going to be talking about the mechanics of how the character stats work, how attacks work, how equipment works, and this will flow naturally into a character creation video afterwards. Depending on how slow I go, this might actually span a couple of videos. We'll see how it goes. This is very early on in the start. At this point, we only have 2 people in our party. Ultimately, you can have up to 6 people in your party. You will find NPCs in the world that can join your group, but you can also, at an inn, you can, quote-unquote, recruit an adventurer, which basically just drops you back into the character creation system. So if you want, you can run with a party of 6 completely customized characters if you'd like to do that. Personally, I'm going to try to pick up as many NPCs as I can find in the world because they tend to have actual, backstories and voice acting, and they tend to be a little bit more interesting than, just someone that you make up in a character creator and doesn't have any of that sort of stuff. So let's open up one of the character sheets and take a look at our character. We're going to start over here with Kalissa, who's actually an NPC that joins you right at the start of the game. So if we go to her actual character sheet, we can see that she is a fighter. I believe, assuming I get my numbers correctly, I think there are 11 different classes in the game. Fighter is obviously your standard sort of just regular fighter type person. You can be melee, you can be ranged, you can be more tanky, you can be more aggressive. What's really interesting about the game system is that there's no real barrier in terms of who can wield what or wear what. There might be things that are better for one person to use than others, but really, if you want to have a wizard going around in heavy armor, you can absolutely do that. There's nothing stopping you in the game, but as we'll explore some of the combat mechanics, you'll see why that might not be an ideal plot. So there are 6 different stats in the game. If you have played Dungeons & Dragons, they will seem to align with some of the stats from D&D. However, they do work a fair bit differently in Pillars of Eternity. In particular, what I love about this system, and I'm a big fan of the system they put in here, is every stat is basically important for everyone. Obviously, there'll always be some that are somewhat more important for whatever role you're trying to fill, but it's very hard to argue that any of the stats are complete dump stats for anyone. First up, we've got Might. We can even click on it and get a nice little pop-up over here. Might represents basically how much damage you do, but you'll note that it's not strength exactly. So even if you're playing someone who's supposed to be an agile rogue, you might want a lot of might because that increases your damage. Not only that, it actually increases the healing you do as well. So if you make a healing priest, for example, you might be tempted to put in a lot of might just because it will also buff up your healing dramatically. It also improves your fortitude, which is the ability to it's basically your constitution saving throw kind of thing, so resisting poison and disease and so on and so forth. Next up is Constitution, which gives you more endurance and health, as well as boosting your fortitude defense, again, against poisons and disease. So what is endurance and health? Health should be pretty straightforward to everyone. You're like, okay, those are hit points. When I run out of those, I die or something, right? Yes, that's true, although you're actually going to be dealing with endurance quite a bit more. Basically, over here on the character sheet, you can see we've got both stats. Endurance is not It's not stamina or it's not mana. There's not really that mechanic in the game. Endurance is basically your hit points for a particular battle. Every time you take damage in battle, you will take both health and endurance damage. When you run out of endurance, you fall on the ground unconscious. As soon as the battle ends, you recover all of your endurance. So, and endurance is relatively easy to get back. Relatively easy. Like, a priest's healing spells will actually recover endurance. Some people have sort of like second wind-ish abilities, which help them recover their own endurance, for example. Health is basically impossible to recover unless you do a full rest. So if you set up camp and you spend the night, that will recover your health. So health puts basically a cap on your ability to keep going fight after fight after fight after fight, but endurance is the thing that keeps you alive in a particular fight. If all of your people have run out of endurance and they're all collapsed onto the ground, well then, GG, game over, you better reload, for example. Dexterity increases your action speed. So this affects everything, casting spells, attacking, for example. More dexterity means you will simply act faster, as well as having a better reflex defense, which helps you avoid mostly harmful area of effect attacks, AoEs. So obviously, again, dexterity, well, everyone wants to act faster, so no one doesn't want dexterity. Perception is where you get into a little bit of a weirder thing. Perception increases your interrupt, your deflection, and your reflex. So we know what the reflex is. Deflection is your ability to resist direct melee and ranged attacks, not area of effect. So basically, if someone's swinging at you with a sword or firing arrows at you, your deflection defense is what you use to avoid that damage completely. More or less. The way basically every roll in this system works is it's a roll from 1 to 100, and a result of 51 or greater results in success, generally speaking. It's a little bit fuzzier than that in combat because they allow for glancing blows as well as crits. So an attack in battle, basically the attacker adds their accuracy, you can see accuracy over here, subtracts the enemy's deflection, or whatever the appropriate defense is for the attack that you're using, so generally deflection, and again, if it comes out at 50 or more, then you hit. And it's a little fuzzy because technically if you roll below 50 but not too low, you can get a glancing blow that just does a little bit of damage. And if ever you roll above 100, you end up with a critical hit that does, like double damage kind of thing. So that's deflection. So interrupt is really interesting. Every time you hit someone, you do an interrupt roll as well. And again, you add your interrupt and you subtract your opponent's concentration. You subtract the concentration. And if that ends up being 50 or higher, then you do an interrupt on your opponent, which basically causes them to play like "oh, I've been hit" animation. And depending on what you're hitting them with, that can use up more or less time. If we take a look at Kalissa here, she's got a battle axe equipped, and if she interrupts someone, she will interrupt them for 0.5 seconds, which is the average interrupt timer. So it's a half a second when the other person isn't acting. Not only are they not acting during that half second, but if they're in process of performing an attack or casting a spell, it actually forces them to restart that whole process. So the average spell takes about 3 seconds to cast, and so if you interrupt them right as they're about to finish casting their spell, not only are they basically stunned for a half a second, they have to restart the spell casting from scratch. At least that's the way I understand the mechanics as presented as is. I am playing a pre-release copy. Some of these mechanics may change, not to mention some of the notes that I've read may be from earlier in the development, so they may not be completely accurate. But that's a really cool mechanic. Now, fast weapons, I don't think I've got one equipped over here. Fast weapons like a dagger, for example, tend to only interrupt for a quarter second, and really heavy weapons can interrupt for longer. I think it's 0.75 for like a big two-handed weapon, for example. So longer interrupt timers are good, but also maybe you want to make someone who's just super fast, pokes people a lot, and keeps forcing them to restart their actions, for example, which becomes very valuable. So obviously this perception stat over here, again, very important for lots of people. One thing to note about these attributes is they don't really have any breakpoints. For every point, and this will be really clear when we go into the character creation process, for every point of might that you have above 10, you gain 3% more damage and healing. And for every point you have below 10, you lose 3% damage and healing. So there's no like, well, I have to make sure I have exactly 15 for my particular battle plan. It doesn't necessarily work that way. So, okay, that's perception. Next, we have intellect over here. Intellect is really cool. Now, classically, in role-playing games, you're like, okay, if I'm playing a wizard, I want a really high intellect. And yes, that's probably still the case in Pillars of Eternity. But it's important to note that, your intellect doesn't give you more spells or necessarily more spell damage. In fact, might is what allows you to do more spell damage. But intellect is really cool in that it increases the area of effective spells and duration. Not just spells, but any effect. Which leads to some interesting questions. If I want to play a wizard, do I go with someone who's really high intellect so it has huge area of effect? Or maybe I want to put in a bunch of might to increase my damage. I'm pretty sure it increases all forms of damage. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure, well, and healing, clearly. So yeah, you can go with like a really bursty wizard that has very tiny AoEs, or you can go with someone who might do less damage but has a much bigger area of effect. Or maybe you'll just max out might and intellect, and then you'll just have like crazy fireball wizard, for example, at the cost of other things. It also increases your will defense. But yeah, the duration. And here's the thing, again, if you're not playing someone who's normally a spellcaster, maybe you've got, I don't know, some sort of barbarian guy who's got the ability to shout, to do things. I don't know. I haven't played that deeply into the game with all of the classes yet, so I don't know what kind of options are available to people. But it becomes possible that you might make a non-standard caster with a lot of intellect, with the idea that you will use a lot of area of effect abilities to try to help control things or do something of that nature, which is really cool to think about. Not to mention there's plenty of dialogue options that require you to have high statistics in one of these areas to get, a more favorable encounter in some amount of conversation. The last step is our resolve. So internal drive, determination, fearlessness, sort of a charisma type thing as well. Quite a few discussion options. You gain a benefit if you have a high resolve, I have noticed. Increases your concentration, which allows you to resist interrupts, for example. And further gives you more deflection, which protects you from direct attacks. And then the will defense as well. So those are the basic attributes that are in here. But we should also talk about some of the gear a little bit more. And then we'll talk about how combat works in a moment here. So if we go into Kalissa's inventory once more, you'll notice she does have 2 weapons, including she's wielding a torch in her offhand, which is quite cool, and you can definitely use torches as weapons. And she's got armor over here. Now, the armor is going to be worth talking about first. You can see that the armor here does not increase our deflection defense. Deflection is your ability to simply not be hit. Armor tends to give you damage reduction, which reduces the amount of damage you take. Now, if you want to see how these mechanics are explained in game, there is a nice cyclopedia over here, and damage reduction over here, so you can get the description. So damage reduction is subtracted directly from all incoming damage. For example, an attack that does 20 damage to a target with 7 DR would be reduced to 17. Damage will never be reduced below 20%. So there's always a minimum amount of damage that gets applied, but damage reduction is obviously a really, really strong way to prevent a lot of incoming damage. But as you can see, this scale armor has a recovery speed penalty. In fact, by default, for every point of damage reduction your armor has, you will lose 5% of your recovery speed. So now it's worth talking about what that means. So in combat, if you're swinging with a weapon that's got an average speed, it takes the animation to perform your attack takes 1 second. After you perform your attack, there is a recovery period, which is also going to be 1 second normally. So this will increase that recovery speed, or by 35%. So instead of taking, after you hit, instead of waiting 1 second before you start your next attack, you'll instead be waiting 1.35 seconds, which is quite a bit slower. I don't believe that your armor changes your attack animation time, which is good, because an increased attack animation time would leave you open to more interrupts. But it does effectively reduce the amount of damage you can put out. So there are a variety of different timers. If you are equipped with just a single one-handed weapon, then the way your recovery timer works is actually this. There's the 1 second, again, if you're an average speed, 1 second to perform your attack animation, 1 second to recover, and then there's actually an additional 1 second recovery period. So effectively, for a one-handed weapon, it's a 1 second to attack, 2 seconds sitting there as a cooldown before you start your attack. And again, if you get interrupted during your attack animation, you have to restart it from scratch. If you get interrupted during your cooldown period gets paused, but doesn't have to restart at that point. So the one-handed time, you can basically attack once every 3 seconds. That is regardless of whether or not you have a shield equipped in your offhand. The difference is, if you have a shield, you'll have a much higher deflection defense. So having a shield equipped makes you much harder to be hit. If you leave your offhand empty, you actually get an accuracy boost. We can see here our accuracy right now is 38. If I go in there, it drops down to 30. So it is very viable to make a one-handed weapon fighter without a shield by taking advantage of higher accuracy, for example, although the shields are pretty damn sexy. What changes when you have 2 weapons equipped? Well, you know how I said the attack animation is 1 second, then there's a 1 second recovery period followed by an additional 1 second recovery period for a total of 2 seconds. Well, that additional 1 second is gone when you're wielding 2 weapons. So instead what it will do, it'll start with the axe here, 1 second to do the animation, 1 second recovery, and then it immediately starts into the 1 second animation for the offhand weapon, followed by another 1 second recovery, which means with 2 weapons, your full attack cycle is 4 seconds. It's hit, hit, hit. You're going back and forth. Every 4 seconds, each weapon will hit once. Or, to put it another way, you get 1 hit every 2 seconds, which is quite a bit faster than if you just had 1 weapon. So 2-weapon fighting style, you will get in quite a few more attacks. You're basically attacking 33% faster. Or, to look at it the other way, a single weapon is 50% slower than dual wielding. If you're using a two-handed weapon, the recovery timer is longer than that. A two-handed... Oh, no, that's not true. A two-handed weapon has exactly the same timer as a one-handed weapon by default. So on a two-handed weapon, it's 1 second plus 1 second plus 1 second. So a 3-second attack timer. However, with a two-handed weapon, you will not get the accuracy bonus, nor will you have the option of wielding a shield. On the other hand, your weapon will hit a lot harder, because a two-handed weapon just has a higher base damage. So there you go. So you've got, some options to choose from over there. This will all be modified by your armor, and some weapons can be faster. I don't know if I've got one here. No, different character would have that. Yeah, this is my character named Test over here. Some weapons are fast, in which case they're 33% faster. All their numbers, every time I said 1 second, a fast weapon will have a 0.66 second turnaround time on there. So if you're dual wielding two fast weapons, you will actually attack once every 1.3 seconds. So basically, Kalissa over here with her scale armor that gives her a 35% recovery speed, for every time she attacks once, someone wearing basically no armor and dual wielding light weapons would attack twice as frequently. It's like, it makes a pretty big difference. So those are the combat mechanics I want to talk about. However, I also want to highlight the spellcasting, which is really cool. So my character here named Test is a druid. As a druid, I have a variety of spells I can cast. So if I take a look at one of these, so Dancing Bolts, for example. If I right-click, I get a description of the spell. It has a range of 15 meters. It has an area of effect. The base area effect is 3 meters. However, because of my intellect, my effective AoE is 4.44 meters, which is a lot bigger. And in fact, you can see that highlighted if you mouse over like this. I believe the red area represents the 3 meters, and the yellow area is the extra space I get because of my intellect. And so not only is it like, at 1.44, it's basically 50% more radius. Well, because of the way you calculate a circle, that's not just 50% more radius. That's more than double the effective area. Not only that, if I go and check, is this faux AoE? It is. Do I have a normal AoE on this character? Oops. I don't think so. Tanglefoot. There we go. There's a great example. So, Dancing Bolt is an area effect that only hits enemies. Tanglefoot is an area effect that will affect everyone within the radius. So if I do this, what'll be quite notable, as I move the red circle onto my party members, you can see that the circle beneath them changes to show that they will be affected. However, note that in the yellow area, that is not the case. So the red area always, assuming it's a spell that hits everyone, the red area will also hit friendly characters. So you want to be careful with that. But the yellow area, which is expanded by your intellect, is always, no matter what spell you're using, as far as I can tell, smart enough to do friend and foe recognition. So I could hit someone in the yellow area, I could hit someone that's an enemy but not hit a friend, which means as a caster, having a high intellect gives you a lot more options as to where you drop things, which is fantastic. By the way, if you don't like these circles and you want to play super hard mode, there are options for that. In the options, there's tons of options, but you can disable area of effect highlighting. So if I disable that and then use the same spell over here, Tanglefoot, you'll notice I'm casting it completely blind with no circle. Why you'd want to be such a masochist, I don't know, but one of the things that's really nice about this game, and we're going to talk about this more in a follow-up video, is that it really, really lets you fine-tune your experience pretty dramatically.
Yes,
to show off the combat and to also show off some light weapons, I'm going to go to a fight that I know is
I've
existing.
got sundries for sale.
I pull this up. I'm going to move to the combat tab over here so we can see some of the mechanics. It is a real-time, pausable game, very much like Baldur's Gate. Anytime I want, I can hit space and pause the game. Not only that, but there's 2 speed controls. I can go at double the speed if I want. Or I can go slow, which is really nice in combat. You can even turn it on so it automatically enters slows mode once you go into combat. So we'll leave it on normal for now. Just run past this guy. And we'll go into a fight that I know exists. In fact, I'm going to leave Kalissa behind. I'm just going to use my character here, Test, which is a terrible name.
As you wish.
And we're going to move over here.
There
you go. I've got it set to automatically pause when combat starts. And again, because I have most of the tooltips turned on, most of the helper options turned on, we get some little pop-ups overhead. These dots show me how much of my endurance is remaining. Again, the endurance is sort of the short-term hit points that determine your ability to stand up in combat. So I'm going to go ahead and activate my Spirit Shift Bear mode. I'm just going to pause for a second and do that. So I'm a druid. I can go into various animal forms. So I'm going to go into the bear form. The druids don't turn into the animals in and of themselves. They turn into sort of like a were version, a hybrid version, right? Like a werewolf kind of thing. I like how I'm so tall, I'm sticking out past the top of the thing. As you can see here, by going into this combat mode, into this bear form, I've been equipped with claws over here, which have quite a bit more damage than my normal weapon, because I was using the longsword. I don't remember. I think the longsword basically does the same as the battle axe. You can see here. Battle axe base numbers is 11 to 16. Does more than that because of her might, which is quite good. Whereas if you look at my character here, because my might is probably, there we go, 11, so I do 3% more damage and healing. My actual damage is only slightly higher than the base, but is really quite good. One thing that's notable about the druids, you remember when I was talking about the speed here, the scale armor. Normal armor, for every point of damage reduction, you lose 5% recovery speed. The advantage to being a druid is you don't get that. In fact, the bear form gets the highest damage reduction out of all the druid forms, but still has 0% impact on recovery speed, which is quite cool. So we'll go ahead and we'll just engage the wolf. I'll keep pausing as we get some of these stats here. There we go. So the wolf engaged me in melee. By being engaged, there's a kind of a cool mechanic here. You see my circle is different. If I go to Kalissa, her circle is just a normal sort of, uninspiring basic circle over there. Whereas with Test over here, my circle has these extra inward pointing arrows. And what this represents is that I'm engaged in melee. If I try to move out of melee range here, the young wolf will get a free attack on me as I try to move away. So it might still be worth moving away, but, it's a disincentive to doing that sort of thing. As far as I know, there's no other modifiers to being engaged. It's just the fact that you have to deal with the fact that if you want to run away, they will give you a free attack. By default, everyone can engage one combatant. That's what these little arrows are showing. I am engaging the wolf is engaging me. If there was another wolf nearby, I would not be engaging that wolf because I can only engage one person. However, later on, you can get some talents that give you the ability to engage more people, which makes for a really good tank setup. You send your one tank sort of forward, he engages a whole group of people who then are disincentivized to run past the fighter towards your squishy casters. So, Young Wolf has hit Test for 1 pierce damage. If we mouse over here, we actually get a complete breakdown of exactly what happened. You can see here, the Wolf's accuracy is 30. My defense is 29, which means that he has a bonus of 1 to his roll. He rolled 80, so 1 to 100. He rolled an 80. So his total is 81. Being above 50, it's definitely a hit. It's not a glancing blow or anything like that. And his damage was 5.1. However, my damage reduction is 10, which means I do 5.1 minus 10 for the actual damage I take. As we read in the tooltip or in the encyclopedia, you always take at least 20% of the blow, which is why I still ended up taking 1 pierce damage, which is about 20% of 5 damage. So I took 1 point of damage and that's it. Whereas my attack the way back, I have actually got a -7 to hit, because my accuracy is only 20, and his defense is 27. I rolled a 28. 28 minus 7 is 21. Note, however, this is still a hit, because I didn't roll apocalyptically. Wow, it's pretty bad. But it's still enough to do a grazing blow, which in this case is 9.8. Grazes, I believe, do about half damage, which is what happened here. So I did about half damage. He has a DR of 4. 9.8 minus 4, why does it still equal 9.8 slashing? Should that not be about 5.8 slash? That's odd. So I still ended up doing about 10 damage, and I'm not sure why that is. There might be some mechanic I'm not catching here. 20%, is it? No? I'm really not sure. I don't think I should have done 10 damage. Again, this is a pre-release build. It's entirely possible that there was a little glitch here. I'm not sure. We'll let the rest of the combat play out. I'll put it on slow speed and just unpause it, and you can watch the rest of the combat log go. You can see my timer there. There's the actual attack animation, then a little bar for my cooldown. So here's the cooldown period, and then I'll attack with the other hand. The animation starts, and I attack. So it takes about 1 second to play the attack animation, 1 second to recover, and normally, if I was using a one-handed weapon or a two-handed weapon, if I was just using a single weapon, that recovery timer would be twice as long. But because I'm effectively dual-wielding, the recovery timer is just the 1 second in between, because I do have an average attack speed.
What is it?
So there we go. So we've got that. And that highlights all that. We talked about the spells. Oh, here's something really interesting. One of the mechanics is you can see here that I gained 42 experience for defeating this wolf. However, I didn't get the experience points for defeating the wolf per se. There's actually an anti-grinding mechanic here where instead of getting experience points for defeating creatures, you get experience points for filling out the bestiary. You can see my bestiary progress for the wolf is 16%. Once that gets filled out completely, I will no longer get experience points for defeating wolves. So you don't really want to grind on the same creature over and over. That would be boring and sucky. So let's go and take a look at the bestiary and see what that is. So in the Cyclopedia, thing at the top here is the bestiary. And you can see there's an entry for wolf. The wolf has some information about it. Now, a lot of this is not filled out. As I fight the wolf, I will find out more and more of this information about them. Its stats, might, constitution, dexterity, and so on and so forth. Its base damage reduction, its defenses, and that sort of thing. So what it means is the next time I encounter a wolf, I can actually mouse over it in combat. Let me go and find another fight here. Slight spoiler. Slight spoiler warning, but this is like, at this point you're about 5 minutes into the game, so it's really not going to be particularly substantial. I'm just going to skip past this little dialogue here in sort of the jerkiest way possible. Let's go back to camp. Okay.
Well,
again, we'll be playing through this properly very, very soon. I just want to show one more fight because there's sort of a cool set of pop-ups that you can get in combat. So again, slight spoilers going on here, but not too much. So we got to cross a bridge. I got to click on a thing. We'll get a nice little dialogue pop-up that we're going to skip completely. So I got to click over here.
Sparful went hunt.
We're just going to skip through this right away. We're going to get ambushed by two sort of barbarian tribal people.
Ambush.
All right. So here's what I wanted to show off. If I mouse over this hunter, we've got to wait for the quest update to go away in the top left corner. Thank you very much. If I mouse over this hunter, you can see I got a tooltip here that shows defenses and damage reduction. If I start attacking him, so I got both people, let's go and start attacking him. And once we start attacking, we'll start to get some of this information. Actually, I might have to kill one first. Oh, there we go. Since I have attacked his deflection defense and hit him, I now know what his defenses are. I know he's got a deflection of 40. Which again is countered by accuracy, and I know he's got a damage reduction of 5. Now, this is a Glanthathan hunter. If I mouse over this person over here, this is also a Glanthathan hunter. That's really hard to say. Now, I don't have any information about her yet, but what's going to be quite notable is after I finish this fight. So again, I don't have any information about this person either, but as I start to attack her, I'll get some more and more information. So she's only got a defense of 28, for example, still has a DR of 5. Now, this is going to, I believe... Oh, maybe there's not a bestiary, because they're not beasts. Oh, I didn't think of that. That's exactly what's going on. Ah, my bad. Okay, because people can wear all kinds of different gear and equipment and stuff. I guess you can't get fixed stats. My point, and unfortunately I'm not going to be able to show it off, is if I found another wolf somewhere, even before engaging the wolf, I'd be able to mouse over the wolf and get this information. However, you can get some variation within a particular species, so the information will be showed sort of gray. It's like, this is the normal, this is what you can expect when fighting these wolves, but we won't give you specifics until you actually start attacking. But then you can find out, yeah, which one of the defenses are lower, so that way you can start to think about what attacks you can use. Just a brilliant system. I like a lot of the mechanics that are going on here. This is the camping button. This is how you would recover health. You can see here that my character here, Test, has taken some actual damage to his health. He's at 121 of 144. This is right at the beginning, so the fights are going to be pretty easy. Plus, I halfway know what I'm doing. Kalissa hasn't taken any damage whatsoever. When you fight, you'll actually see the portrait sort of turn red. That represents the loss of endurance. And if it turned completely red, I'd run out of endurance. I would keel over onto the ground, unconscious, but not dead. But if you run out of health completely, your character can die. Now, with the default settings, the first time you run out of health, you will be maimed. You won't die. Maimed will give your character a pretty terrible debuff, a pretty terrible penalty to something for combat. It is pretty brutal, but I believe you can repair maimed, maybe by camping, or maybe you have to go back to town and go to a temple. I actually haven't poked around with that too much, but maimed is not permanent. You can resolve it, but it is really bad. However, if they run out of health a second time, if they go down a second time while they are maimed, they will die and they will be permanently dead in the game. When someone is dead, they are dead. Plus, and you can turn that off, which means there's no more maim status. Someone runs out of hit points, they are completely dead right from the start. And I don't believe there's any way to resurrect someone who has actually died in the game, which is actually pretty awesome and adds some real drama, or maybe gets you addicted to the quick load, quick save button. However, if you don't like that idea, let me show you something real cool. Let me quit to the main menu here. When we start a campaign, there's your difficulty settings, from easy for people who haven't played these types of games before, normal, people who are experienced to these types of games, hard, people who want a challenge, and then Path of the Damned, people who are crazy and want something insanely hard. Warning, this option can't be changed in-game. Now, I believe you can change between these 3 settings in-game from the options menu. You can tweak your difficulty, I'm pretty sure, once you play, except for Path of the Damned, which if you lock this in, it's going to be entirely difficult. And not only do they just scale up the enemies, but they tend to have more enemies. There's also the expert mode, which toggles on under game. Yeah, expert mode over here. Having expert mode on turns off all of these helpers. You can turn off expert mode once you're in game, but you can not turn it back on. So if you want to complete the game on expert mode, you have to do the whole thing on expert mode. But then not only that, you got Trial of Iron over here, where the game only has 1 save file for your playthrough, and if your main character is killed, the file is deleted. real roguelike kind of like permadeath kind of thing. If your main character dies, plus, there's no real ability to reload too much. I mean, I think technically you could do a little bit of reloading here, but because there's only one save file, if you go into a new area, it auto-saves when you enter an area, so that'll be your new save. So your ability to sort of backtrack to a previous save is going to be a lot more limited in Trial of Iron, and if your main character dies, it's just game over, restart from scratch. So Path of the Damned Expert Mode Trial of Iron, that would be one of the most masochistic runs I can possibly imagine. And let me tell you, I've played this game. I've played games like this quite a bit before, lots of RPGs, but including Infinity Engine style RPGs, which is what this is. And I had plenty of wipes on normal because there's a lot of flexibility in how you progress through the story, and it's very easy to find yourself in an area that is much too hard for your current configuration. So, you know, I had that wipe. So I will not be playing with either of these, including expert mode, because, well, some of the things I like to have off, I do, there's some of them, like the area effect highlighting, no, I just want that. I'm not going to be leaving that out because it's just too important for me. So we'll be manipulating that. Okay, I think that's everything I want to look at. I will be doing an actual Let's Play of this, at least the first couple of chapters, basically. Potentially a full game, but at least the start of it. But I will also be putting out a video showing the character creation, but I want to do this mechanic thing first. So hopefully there'll be a link down in the description box to the character creation video and to the gameplay video, but if not, hopefully you'll be able to find it relatively easy. Do leave a comment or tweet at me or something like that if I've forgotten to do the links, and I'll go ahead and do that right away. And as always, commenting, liking, favoriting, subscribing, all that stuff, really good, really big help for the channel, and I will see you guys next time.